USS Minneapolis was part of the New Orleans class, a class that would start the war somewhat poorly, with 3 out of the 7-strong class lost at the First Battle of Savo Island. But oddly, this seemed to galvanise the remaining ships, as 3 out of the remaining 4 would end up all sitting joint third for the title of Most Decorated US Warship of World War II, along with a destroyer that also decided to get as many battle stars. Minneapolis started life in June 1931, hitting the water in September 1933 and entering service with the fleet in May 1934, the 4th ship of the class to do so. After working up and receiving the inevitably necessary tweaks that a working up voyage highlights the need for, she joined the Scouting Force, one half of the main US fleet in the 1930s, designed, as the name suggests, to find the enemy fleet and prevent the enemy from finding the US battle force. Then guide the battle force in to destroy anything that the Scouting Force had found. As a result, she would spend most of the interwar period based on the West Coast, and despite her East Coast origins, it was to be in the Pacific Theatre that she would spend most of her operational career. She missed Pearl Harbor by the narrowest of margins, but since she was intact, she was assigned to carrier escort almost before the smoke had cleared, initially looking after USS Lexington on various raids until the carrier was lost at the Battle of the Coral Sea, when, despite Minneapolis's best efforts, some of the attacking Japanese Navy aircraft got through. However, since she was herself undamaged, she was reassigned to Task Force 16, looking after the Enterprise and Hornet during the Battle of Midway. With those battle stars under her belt, it was time to enter the meat grinder of the Guadalcanal campaign, again as a carrier escort, keeping USS Saratoga safe during the Battle of the Eastern Solomons. But a week after that battle, the carrier was torpedoed by a Japanese submarine. Thanks in part to the improved damage control measures implemented after Coral Sea, this Lexington-class vessel didn't burst into flames, and Minneapolis was able to tow the ship until it could get its own engines back online. With the US Navy running out of carriers to escort, the ship was reassigned to supporting the troops ashore, missing out on the Battle of the Santa Cruz Islands as a result, but was assigned to the reconstituted Task Force 67 and sent into a night action to intercept the Japanese Navy's Tokyo Express supply runs, which resulted in the Battle of Tassafaronga, which didn't go so well, in part due to failures of leadership. Minneapolis was hit by 2 torpedoes and had her bow practically blown off. It folded down to an almost vertical degree and then sat there acting as a gigantic water break, although as the ship had lost power, that didn't matter too much in the immediate term. However, thanks to quick work by her surviving crew, she was quickly patched up with coconut logs once what was left of the bow had been removed, and then she set sail to a slightly better supplied port and received a temporary stub bow, which in turn allowed her to make it back across the Pacific to the continental United States for a full repair and refit. The US Navy took the time to add many additional systems, since she'd been pretty much active since the start of the war, and there were numerous new radars as well as plenty of 20mm Oerlikon and 40mm Bofors anti-aircraft guns, which could be liberally distributed across her decks. By summer 1943, Minneapolis was back up and ready for action. Whilst she would still see a lot of carrier guarding duty, as with almost any US ship with a reasonable gun battery in the latter part of the war, she was also called on to provide fire support to shore-based troops, in her case on many occasions. Particular highlights of this phase of the war included screening US carriers at the Battle of the Philippine Sea, also known as the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot, and getting stuck in at the Battle of Surigao Strait alongside 7th Fleet's old battleships, thus helping to take down Yamashiro, Mogami, and Shigure. In fact, the only major action she'd miss was the assault on Okinawa, and that wasn't for lack of trying. In fact, she'd ended up trying too hard in earlier engagements and worn out her guns, requiring a trip home to get them replaced, almost making it back across the Pacific before the end of the war, with the Japanese surrender coming just after she'd reached the Philippines. Instead of being part of the ceremony in Tokyo Bay, she would instead head for the Asian continent itself, accepting Japanese surrenders in various occupied areas on mainland Asia, before helping take some of the hundreds of thousands of US troops who are now an ocean away from home back across the Pacific. Her efforts had netted her a total of 17 battle stars for her wartime career, and then she was moved into reserve. She had been hard worn, and there were simply bigger and better cruisers available in larger numbers, such as the Baltimores, and more were being built. Nonetheless, she was maintained in reserve for another 12 years, just in case she was needed again. But, as it turned out, not even the Korean War was enough to get her back into action, and she would be sold for scrap in the summer of 1959.
That's it for this video. Thanks for watching. If you have a comment or suggestion for a ship to review, let us know in the comments below. Don't forget to comment on the pinned post for dry dock questions.